Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Without going into too much of detail about our distinguished panelists here today, I'd like to get... Just 1 second, sorry. Right. I'd like to introduce the Honorable Minister, Mr. Pradhan, who I'm sure doesn't need an introduction to this audience in particular. And we have Ms. Vandana Hari with us, who I'm told has been good enough to fly in from Singapore and is somebody who will be able to throw a lot of light on the state of the world in terms of a very precious natural resource, oil and gas. Which is something that you cannot create, but we have a certain amount in the world, and we're going to try to understand from her the linkage between that and the state of the economy. But Mr. Pradhan, sir, the first, and I think this is an obvious question for you, what are the challenges that you have faced in the last several years in terms of oil and energy diplomacy? For two reasons. One is, the world is not a peaceful place. And the second obvious reason is demands continue to grow beyond what perhaps the most precious natural resource we have in the world can sustain to provide for that demand. So what is your biggest hurdle that you see in front of you?
Thank you, Maroof. If I put in this way, the two big challenges we face in Indian energy scenario, the geopolitics is changing every day. The changing geopolitics is creating anxiety, creating uncertainty that affects the commodity price of energy. And a very price sensitive country like India, the emerging economy, a lot of poor people are there, a lot of lower middle class people are there. Today, energy is a inevitable thing our day-to-day life. In this scenario, the volatility of price is one among the biggest challenges. And I don't see any dearth of resource in the world for our requirement of the demand. But country like India, who depends a lot on import, because in the fossil fuel, in the primarily on the crude oil and natural gas, we are not self-sufficient as in today. With our own limitation, India is the number 3 energy consumer today. With this kind of demand, the import is a pressure on our economy. Price volatility and import requirement is the challenge of Indian energy market. With lot of effort, we want to change the scenario. I think we are confident we are on the path. We will find out some way.
I'll come to the efforts that have been made or not have been made in terms of how we address internal exploration, internal initiatives. But Vandana, I want to understand from you, and I think the audience needs to understand the answer to a simple question. Oil and gas is finite. The world has taken about 150 years to get to this point where we have, some would argue, consumed about half of the world's reserves. The other half, whether we are at peak point or we are going to get there in another 10 years, is debatable. Experts can play with figures. But really, do you see that the state of oil prices impacting on the state of the world economy? Because since the 70s, 5 out of 6 recessions have seen close linkage between recession and a spike in oil prices. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. Oil is central to economic growth, but equally oil prices can be quite damaging, especially when economies are vulnerable. And the past 3 years, we have seen this collaboration of OPEC and non-OPEC, they have taken 10 other major producers along with them to try and control, to restrain supply, to prevent oversupply. They are succeeding. And so we saw a huge price crash in 2014.
Yes.
But since these restraints began in 2017, 18, and 19, we have seen prices going up a bit. Now, the biggest worry for consumer countries all over the world, including India, is now that this group is successful, will they try and raise prices to $70, $80? So the very short answer to that is no. And I'll give you two main reasons. First of all, within that combine, Russia, which is the major non-OPEC collaborator, is a dovish force. What I mean by that is even if it is acknowledged and accepted that the Saudi Arabia wants higher oil price, they'll be much happy with $70 and $80. So today we are sitting at $65 Brent, just for reference. Russia has been a moderating influence in that. The other big one is Trump. So we saw throughout 2018, when prices started going towards $70 or threatened to go above that, Trump started putting a lot of pressure on Saudi Arabia. My belief is that that is not going to change, at least as long as he's in power, and we have yet to see if he comes back for a second term. The third reason is US shale. So to your earlier point, is the world running out of oil and gas? No, that is not the worry anymore. I think the shale renaissance in the US has proven that there is, as long as the world has new technology, there will be more oil and gas.
I'll come to that a bit later because my understanding is all the alternate fuels, and shale is perhaps the big one in that, also needs a certain amount of fuel-related products to energize them into producing the energy that you need. But I'll come to that, and I'd like you to prove or explain to us that perhaps that assumption among some of the critics is maybe misplaced or whatever, but I'll come to you later. But Mr. Pradhan, sir, our import bill is about 77% of, in terms of our energy requirements, 77% comes from outside. Mr. Modi's government, and you leading the pack there in terms of projections, have suggested that we could bring it down to 67%. We could be looking at a figure of 50% by 2030. Do you feel in the last 1 year, and in terms of our trying to become a 5 trillion economy, is that still very much the target? Because the broad understanding is you need more and more oil to fuel growth.
Maroof, if I say it this way, there are three things. I am day by day, I am confident of our own independent capacity. Every day our requirement is increasing. We are today, I agree with you, today we are depending on 70 to 80% of our requirement we are importing. But the development of science and technology and the new business model, India is, and through reforms, when we came to power, we took responsibility. What was the strategy of the day? Revenue maximization was the strategy of the day. With 5 years of the responsibility, we have changed the paradigm. Now, production maximization is our strategy. Revenue, when we will get revenue? When there will be more production. Due to lot of reform, we are confident our gas production is going to increase. Our oil production will be going to at a plateau because the nature of oil is, it will deplete. And with our more additional of acreage, we will have our plateau. And not only traditional oil and gas, India is going for alternative energy. India is going to produce more syngas out of its coal reserve. India is going to concentrate on coal bed methane. India is going to more biofuels, more bio-CNGs, and more ethanol, more 2G ethanol. We have in India, we have a conventional calculation of 600 million metric ton of biomass. Technologies are available today. Progressive business model, offtake guarantee we are providing to our entrepreneur. Through all this initiative, we are confident we will be reducing our import dependency. And not only that, hydrogen is a new form of energy, and we are tying up with the advanced economy, and India is very much focused. The Maharashtra is going to be the pioneer. One group at Pune with some senior scientists and good entrepreneurs, they will come out with a good model of hydrogen as a fuel. And India and all like company are on the advanced stage of tying up with some technology company to having its hydrogen fuel. So we are moving towards that. India is bound to grow, and we will have our own path of energy route, which will be more self-sufficient.
Okay. Ms. Hari, I don't think you entirely agree with that, but let me also play the devil's advocate and give you some statistics. The first is alternate energy options like solar panels, windmills, etc., despite many subsidies and tax breaks by worldwide. I'm not just looking at India. I'm saying worldwide the experience has been 13%, let me be optimistic and say 15% of the world's energy requirements have come through alternate energy initiatives. Maybe a percentage here and though, you'd be able to correct us down to the specifics. Now, that leaves us with about 85 to 87% still dependent on oil and gas. Out of that 13%, it is said that something like 11.3% would come from nuclear and hydropower and 1.6% from solar and wind. Are you going to see this changing? Do you see that the world, and it's not just India, Mr. Pradhan's at the forefront of that, but elsewhere in the world also efforts are being made. There is a lot of talk, but has that talk translated into reality?
So first of all, it's not just India. The whole world is primarily dependent on oil, and for the foreseeable future will remain dependent on oil. So the challenge for us, and if India's economy is going to continue growing, please, India should not fret about its growing energy growth. There is still energy poverty in India. India's focus needs to remain on accessibility, affordability of that energy, because you're not going to grow your economy by continuing to leave those poor people in energy poverty. Globally, yes, there is an effort. We have to recognize, however, that renewables is not the silver bullet. It's not the panacea. It's not going to replace coal. It's not going to replace oil. So as Mr. Pradhan says, what is the way forward? The way forward, of course, is for India, it needs to find the energy. It needs to find affordable energy for its millions. It needs to diversify, which India is already doing. Do not expect that renewable energy will suddenly power everything in the world around us. That's not going to happen. So diversify the sources, diversify where the energy comes from, and absolutely by all means, encourage production of oil and gas to the extent it is available and can be tapped in India.
In fact, you've led me to the question that I had for Mr. Pradhan. This is, where do you find the more energy sources? There is a lot of effort by Indian companies, the government of India, to identify oil fields abroad. There is effort to try and get backup sources, as it were, whether it's Africa, Latin America, more coal from Indonesia, a bit we're hearing talk about a Vladivostok to India kind of line which will provide. Question is there is an argument by critics to say that investing precious money in oil fields and energy sources in volatile parts of the world could be a dangerous investment. I'd like the minister to clear that aspect. And the second is, out of your energy security linkages, is it also your responsibility not just to ensure that once the energy docks in at your port here, that thereafter you ensure that the energy pipeline till it reaches the consumer through the petrol pump is secure, but your basic source of energy through where it is coming, you participate in the security of those energy sources also. What are your views on that?
You see, you are talking about the old time. Today, in last 5 years, what we have done in energy investment. Yes, at some point of time, India was investing in African countries where the character you have mentioned, lot of geopolitical challenges were there. But recently, I cite two examples. How do we invest very wisely? For the first time, due to the new decisiveness of Prime Minister Modi and the global relationship of Prime Minister Modi, for the first time we got an opportunity to invest in a producing field in UAE, in the Lower Rijak. It's a producing field. In Russia, we invested more than $5 billion in a producing field in the Vankor cluster. And we are negotiating with Rosneft, the state-owned company of Russia, to invest in their Far East cluster, the eastern cluster. We are planning to have a link from Vladivostok to eastern part of the country. The changing geological situation of world, the new area of energy is coming in the eastern part of Russia, and we are concentrating on that. Today, we are very much focused to invest on the producing field. In that way, we can fortify our own interest of energy security. And not only on oil fields. If we go by the statistics of last few decades, Vandana will agree with me, the oil company, oil majors of world started investing more in LNG projects than oil projects. LNG is a cheaper commodity in global market today in comparison to oil. And India is creating a gas-based infrastructure, putting more pipelines, putting more regasification infrastructure, more contract in the global market for LNG. In that way, we can reduce the pressure of oil price in balance to LNG. LNG is cheaper than oil in comparison, and we are more towards a gas-based economy, and gas is more cleaner and more convenient. Yes. We are rebalancing in the hydrocarbon portfolio also.
Okay. I think there is room for optimism there. I agree with you on that. But there is another aspect I want to bring out, and I think, Vandana, you are best placed to educate us. Studies have shown over the past at least 2, if not 3 decades, that every time you target a 7% growth target for an economy, your consumption requirements from what the world was being able to provide, your consumption requirements virtually double. So there is that one set of analysis. So which shows that, say, between 1965 and 2005, 65 was regarded by some people as when discovery really took off for oil resources. And 2005 was the time when production began to peak. Some would argue it hasn't peaked, it will go to 225, 230, whatever. There is a gap of 40 years in which we reach that phase where we can measure growth versus consumption. What do you see now happening, particularly in ambitious growth targets being set by countries like India? And of course, China has always had ambitious growth targets. So where do you see the resource coming from?
So when I started looking at the oil markets about 25 years ago, for the longest period of that, the biggest worry of globally was peak oil. And at that time, peak oil meant peak supply of oil. For the past, I would say, 5 years or a little bit more, the worry of oil producers around the world, from Russia to Saudi Arabia to Venezuela, is peak oil demand. So the efforts across the world, and especially in developing countries, US, China, India, these are the top three oil consumers today. The US consumes about 20 million barrels per day. China consumes about 12 million barrels per day. India is a distant third with about 4.5 million barrels per day, okay? The world is not running out of oil. So what are the challenges for a developing economy like India? As I said, the energy demand is going to continue growing. It is how, and India has no control over oil prices, where they go, or the volatility, or the disruption in supply, as we saw earlier this year with the attacks on Saudi Arabia. So there's a few things that can be done, and I think quite a few of those that India is already doing. One is diversify the sources of energy, so natural gas. Thanks to the shale boom, again, natural gas has become much cheaper, but we need to have some patience. Natural gas is not like a switch that you can just turn on. It's far easier, we have to remember, far easier to transport oil. All our economies globally have been built on consuming oil. You can't, engines have to be developed to switch to natural gas. Infrastructure has to be in place. So you need to have patience. In terms of volatility and in terms of geopolitics, I think that is something we'll have to live with. We'll have to see how best we can manage that. One of my recommendations to India, again, is follow in the footsteps of China. Do have a strategic reserve. China now has nearly 80 days worth of supply. It has created in strategic reserves. I believe India should go in that direction as well. That will be a little bit of a cushion for the country to manage the supply risks.
Well, I can only thank you both for all your wisdom and basically putting us to rest in terms of the fact that the world is not running dry as yet of oil. And quite clearly, I think the one area that we need to watch our ambitions apart is the geopolitics of oil, in which a certain amount of impact of events in our neighborhood could derail the growth process in a worst case scenario. But in a best case scenario, as the minister assured us, there are alternate plans and initiatives in place. Thank you very much for being with us. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pradhan, Ms. Hari, as well as Maroof, for taking forward